Today, we are here at Tlow's Thoughts. The title of this talk will be Search for Meaning First. Search for meaning first when listening to someone speak, especially if they aren't a native speaker of your tongue. When learning a new language, or when someone speaks a dialect or has a visible ancestry that you're prejudiced against. There is a saying in French that goes, "C'est le fond, pas la forme," meaning it is the substance of what is said rather than the style in which it is said. As someone who struggles with listening to understand rather than respond, or even struggling to listen without getting distracted, the notion of finding meaning first helps. I came to the conclusion to find meaning first when listening to someone speak by reflecting back on my upbringing with my Congolese mother who spoke English with a very heavy accent. Growing up, I never thought my mother had an accent as I was habituated to her manner of speech. So then when my peers or neighbors would ask me what my mom was saying, I was confused how they couldn't understand her. To me, she was speaking plain English, but to them, her accent was adding a mesh, a filter over her words, disguising their meaning. From my upbringing, I've found that I can decipher English and other foreign accents too. When wondering how I was able to do this, I realized that 1. My mother speaking accented English made it easier for me to pick up English and other accents. And 2, when listening to heavily accented foreign English, I focus on what I believe someone is trying to say, aka focusing on the meaning. So what exactly does focusing on the meaning entail? Well, when I say focusing on the meaning, I'll own in on the sounds of words, the context in which they are being said, hand gestures, and ultimately tonality. Paying attention to key words and asking clarifying questions helps as well. In my anecdotal experience, U.S. English speakers are better at doing all of these behaviors than French speakers. In the context of France and even in the Democratic Republic of Congo, my experience has been that the moment native speakers heard my U.S. accent, they would switch to English or state that they didn't speak English. This was often frustrating because I would often find that their English was poorer grammatically, tonally, and in vocabulary than my French. But still, they insisted on this dynamic being preferable. When they spoke in broken English, I would make sure to search for meaning in their words. This allowed me to be successful in communicating with them. But I often wish that they did the same for me. In the case for English speakers, specifically those born in the US, I suspect that their ability to hear accents and remain in conversation with people is due to having more exposure to foreign accented English. Greater ethnic and racial diversity in the US, as well as regional diversity, leads to greater exposure to varying pronunciation of words. But in the case for the French, there's a homogeneity in pronunciation, influenced by the lower racial and ethnic diversity in France proper, smaller geographic size, so less variation in regional accents, an academy that oversees the language, and the delicate pronunciation of words that requires certain tonality or else meaning can be skewed. Native U.S. English speakers still fell short of being able to decipher my mother's words. Mostly people with limited exposure to foreign accents. If they practiced the ways mentioned earlier to focus on the meaning, then no matter the accent, one could still figure out a person's intended message. For the sounds of words, often certain words, give out key context to what someone is attempting to convey. If a person is asking for directions to Mayberry Street, the word street or where are key words that can stand out in English speech, especially when emphasized. Next, context. As one is ordering food at a restaurant, the mispronunciation of oil to oil should be understood that the intended meaning was for the oil. Hand gestures are commonplace for anybody who has tried to communicate with someone or you both don't speak the same language. Hand gestures are self-explanatory, so I won't dwell on that. Tonality, the tone of voice or pitch, depending on the word itself, can tell one the emotional valence of a message. For example, if someone were to scream dance or whisper dance, the former could be a command, while the latter, a question. Outside of foreign accents or dialects, I also mentioned the need to search for meaning first in regards to combating one's own prejudices. Often in my life, I've noticed non-Black people wince, look away, or not pay attention when I'm speaking with them. This is especially when I'm speaking with authority on a subject that is not entertainment or music, such as science or mathematics. The results of this is at the end of my speech, they look at me puzzled, as if they didn't understand a word I said. Had they paid attention to what I was saying, rather than how I said it, or my own unique voice tenor, then they could have heard the message. For myself, I'll check my own prejudices by ensuring that when I hear an accent that I've associated as inferior, that I must be conscious to search for the meaning of what the person with said accent is saying even more, to override my own bigotry. An example that stands out to me was in an undergrad, during a comparative genomics class. This brilliant master's student in the evolutionary biology department was leading a Zoom presentation. I had never heard the person speak before, but was familiar with their work due to the nature of the class. When they first spoke, and a thick Southern accent came out, I was surprised. And at that moment, I had to confront my own prejudice against Southern accents and immediately assuming the carrier to be of low intelligence. As the student carried on with the presentation, I had to make sure to pay attention to what they were saying and not the accent that carried with it. Now, the strategy for decreasing in-person language prejudice could be interpreted as accent blindness, where the default accent that a hearer has in mind is labeled as good and any other deviation bad. So one erases the bad accent and only focuses on the words, not appreciating that the accent is a part of the personality of pronunciation, a part of the identity. In the way that colorblind people in the US set the default as white and treat people accordingly, which leads to a denial of the lived experiences of non-whites. So, to avoid this accent blindness, a focus on the words someone says doesn't mean that you don't obviously hear the accent someone has, but to not let the form be more important than the phoned. And that is all I have today for Tlow's Thoughts. Until next time, peace.